Hello viewers, welcome to K Diagnostics. Dio here. Today we have a 2008 Mercedes GL320 with a 3.0 liter. The customer complaint on this vehicle is the coolant level is dropping every other day on the coolant reservoir. So when you have coolant dropping inside the coolant reservoir, it means there is a leak somewhere. Hopefully that is a external leak, which is going to be easy to find. But if it's an internal leak, that can be a big problem. So I hope this is an external leak. The customer dropped it off so we can figure out why the coolant level is dropping every other day. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pressurize the cooling system so we can see if there's an external leak around the engine compartment. Hopefully there's an external leak, and once we find where the leak is, then we will know what we're going to do so we can fix whatever that's causing the coolant to drop every other day in the coolant reservoir. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to pressurize the cooling system so we can find our leak. So I'm going to open up the hood. So I will bring you guys over here so we can pressurize the cooling system. Alright, so we're going to use this cooling system pressure tester to pressurize the cooling system. So I'm going to remove this cap. So we're going to top off the cooling system, and then we're going to pressurize it. So we're going to choose the right adapter for this. I believe it's this one. So now we're going to pressurize the cooling system. I'm going to pump this hand pump, and we're going to pressurize it up to 15 psi. So once we reach 15 psi, I'm going to stop, and then I'll bring you guys around the engine compartment so we can look around to see if we're going to find an external leak. So I'm going to pressurize this. Alright, so I pressurized it up to 15 psi. I'll bring you guys over here so I can show you the pressure on the gauge. Then we will look around the engine bay to see if there is a leak. Here is the pressure on the pressure gauge. So I pressurized it up to 15 psi. As you can see, our gauge is dropping slowly. So there's definitely a leak somewhere here. Alright, so we're gonna look around the engine. So we're gonna look around here. I don't see a coolant leak up here. So I see something down here. This area looks wet. I see coolant leaking. Let me remove this tube. So let's get this tube out of the way. So right here, guys, here is our coolant leak. So coolant is leaking from the radiator core. So the radiator core is busted. So this is going to be an easy one. So at this point, what we have to do is we have to replace the radiator because the plastic core of the radiator is cracked. So that's where the leak is. So now we have to remove the radiator. We're going to remove the radiator. We're going to replace it with a new one. This problem will be fixed. So now what we have to do is we got to replace this radiator. So let's do that. Alright, so we're gonna remove our pressure tester first. I'm gonna release all that pressurized air out of the system. Alright, so we're gonna get this out of the way. Now the next step is going to be removing the front bumper. in order to remove the radiator, we have to get the front bumper out, because if we get the front bumper out, it's going to give us access to get to the bottom bolt of this bracket. This bracket over here has to come out, and this core support has to come out also. This core support has 3 bolts. There are 2 over here, there's another one down here, and then there are 3 more on this side, 2 over here, and then 1 right there. Okay, and then this piece over here, the core support, is going to come out. Once the core support comes out, then we will get access to the radiator. We're going to disconnect all the radiator hoses, we're going to remove the fan, and the radiator should be able to come out. But we cannot remove this core support without removing this piece, and this piece goes all the way down there. It goes all the way, I don't know if I can show it to you right there. So this piece goes all the way down to the bottom of the front bumper. So we're gonna have to remove the bumper so we can get to the 2 bolts of this bracket that go pretty much behind this Mercedes symbol. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna undo these bolts over here. So we're gonna undo this bolt, the bolt next to the headlight. There's this one over here, and then there's another one right here. After we undo these 2 bolts, we're gonna come over here in the wheel well. There is a bolt around this area that we have to remove. I'm gonna show it to you once I get to it. We're gonna remove this bolt over here that holds the corner of this front bumper. Once we remove this, then we will pry the front bumper out. Okay, so I'm going to grab the tools. We can remove these 2 bolts up here that hold the front bumper on the core support. So now let's do that. I forgot one thing that we have to do first before we remove the bumper. Before we remove these 2 bolts up here, we're gonna go under the vehicle and drain the radiator. So let's do that first before we remove the bumper. Let's go under the vehicle so we can drain coolant out of the radiator. So now let's do that. I'm looking around at the bottom of the radiator. There is no drain plug that I can see here. So it looks like this radiator doesn't have a drain plug. Okay, so that's helpful. So we're just gonna have to undo one of the radiator hoses and put a drain container down here to catch all the coolant that will come out of the radiator. So with that being said, one thing we can do while we're down here is we can disconnect that fan control module. You see the electrical connector over there? So this guy over here, so we can disconnect that, okay? I'm gonna disconnect this electrical connector while we're down here, so this will make it easy for us to remove the fan. So I won't be able to show you while I'm disconnecting it, but I'm gonna disconnect this fan control module. So now I'm gonna do that. So right there, here is the electrical connector of the fan control module. So right there, guys, I got the fan control module disconnected. So now let's go under the hood so we can remove the front bumper. Alright, so I removed the 2 bolts that hold the top of the front bumper on the core support. So now we're going to remove the side bolt that hold each side of the bumper. Once we remove those 2 sides bolt, then we will remove the bumper. So I'm going to start on the passenger side. I'm going to show you how to remove the one on the passenger side, and then I will do the one on the driver's side off camera. So now let's do the one on the passenger side. Alright, so there will be a bolt over here that we have to remove. So let's undo this plastic rivet over here. So down in here, so there's a bolt over here that we have to remove. So I'm gonna remove this bolt. I don't know if you can see that. After I remove this bolt, we will pry the bumper out. So now I'm gonna grab a torque. It looks like it's a T45. I'm gonna grab a torque socket so we can remove this bolt up here. Alright, so here comes the bolt. Now we're gonna get it out of the way. So we removed the bolt, so now we're gonna pry this out. So right there, this side of the bumper is removed. I'm gonna do the same thing on the driver's side. After I remove the corner bolt on the driver's side, then I will bring you guys back up so we can remove the whole front bumper. So I will do that and then I'll bring you guys back up. Alright, so the corner bolt on the driver's side is removed. So now I'm gonna pry the front bumper outward. So at this point, the bumper is off. So I'm going to disconnect the electrical connectors of the fog lights. Alright, so now I'm gonna lift up the front bumper so I can remove it. So I'm just gonna move it out of the way. So I got the front bumper out of the way. The front bumper is pretty straightforward and easy to remove on this one. Only 2 bolts up here and then 2 more on each corner of the bumper, and then the bumper comes out. Okay, so the bumper is out of the way. So now I'm gonna bring you guys over here so we can remove these 3 bolts over here that hold the core support in place. Alright, so we got these ones removed. So now we're gonna remove these ones over here. Alright, so now I'm going to remove this seal. So at this point I can just pry this piece back. Okay, and now we can lift this. This is the hood cable. So now this piece can come out. So we're gonna get this out of the way. Alright, so the up cord support is removed. So we can just push this radiator hose up here and out of the way. Okay, so now the next step is going to be removing the radiator shroud. So the radiator shroud has 2 bolts on each side. There's this one over here, and then there's another one over here. Okay, so I'm gonna undo these 2 bolts, this one and then this one. Since we already disconnected the radiator fan, the fan module, we already disconnected it. After I remove these 2 bolts, the radiator fan should come out. Okay, actually I can already remove this air tube over here. This one just pries out. Alright, so that's good. We are making progress. I'm going to remove these 2 fan bolts so we can remove the radiator fan. Alright, so I removed the two 10mm bolts that hold the radiator fan onto the radiator. So now I'm gonna lift up the radiator fan. Alright, so here comes the radiator fan. So right there, I got the radiator fan removed. So the fan and shroud assembly is removed. So now we're gonna get it out of the way. So I'll bring you guys over here so I can show you what we're gonna remove next. So we got the radiator fan assembly removed. So now the next step is going to be disconnecting the radiator hoses, the upper hose and the lower radiator hose, which is down there. And then we have some transmission cooler lines on this side of the radiator that we have to disconnect. Actually, before we do that, we're gonna undo the drain plug of the radiator. I said that this radiator doesn't have a drain plug. Well, I was wrong, because I couldn't really see this drain plug. I guess I should have looked at service info, but I just didn't want to look at service info. Well, I couldn't see that drain plug from underneath, and also the fan was in the way. I mean, the fan assembly was in the way. I couldn't really see it. But now with the fan out, I can see the drain plug right there. So I'm gonna undo that drain plug so we can drain coolant out of the radiator. So now let's do that. So right there, I have a drain container under the vehicle. So we're gonna drain all the coolant out of the radiator, and then we will start disconnecting the radiator hoses. Alright, so while the radiator is draining, we're gonna undo this bolt over here. There's this bolt, and then there's another one over here that we have to undo. This bolt over here holds the air cooler and the AC condenser on the radiator. So we're gonna have to undo this bolt so we can free up the AC condenser from the radiator. So now let's do that. Alright, so here comes this bolt. We're gonna get it out of the way. So now we're gonna remove this one over here. Alright guys, so we undid these two bolts over here. Now the next thing is going to be removing this bracket so we can get the air cooler out. Once we remove the air cooler out, we will have enough room to access the radiator hoses, because right now we cannot really get access to the upper radiator hose, which is behind this air cooler tube. Okay, so actually I'm gonna disconnect this radiator hose, this small radiator hose, and then I'm going to undo this clamp over here. Now let's do that. So we're gonna push this out of the way. Alright, so right there, so that's removed. So now I'm gonna undo this clamp for the air cooler tube. Alright, so now I'm gonna disconnect this air cooler tube. So we got this side disconnected. So now we're gonna disconnect the passenger side. I mean, because we have to remove the air cooler so we can have enough room to access the radiator hoses. Alright, so we got these disconnected. So now the next step is gonna be removing these bolts over here. There's one over here, and then there's another one down here. So once we remove these two 10mm bolts that are on each side of the air cooler, and then we're gonna remove the two bolts over here for this bracket, then the air cooler will come out. So now let's do that. Alright, so here comes the front bracket. So we're gonna get it out of the way. Alright, so now the air cooler should come out. Alright, so here comes the air cooler. So I'm gonna get it out of the way. Alright, so we got the air cooler out. So now we're gonna remove this plastic cover. So we got the two bolts up here off. So this plastic cover has two more bolts down here. So over here, this one, and then there's another one on this side. That one over there. So now let's remove this bolt so we can remove this plastic cover. So I'm gonna remove the first one. So I'm gonna remove the second one over here. Alright, so we got this one removed. So there's another bolt over here that we have to remove. This one holds the bracket for the power steering cooler lines on the radiator. I'm gonna have to undo that one also. Alright, so now I'm gonna remove this bumper support. So this bumper support has two bolts down here. So this bumper support has to come out so we can remove this plastic cover. Alright, so now I'm gonna slide the bumper cover out. Alright, so here comes the bumper cover. I'm gonna get it out of the way. Alright, so now this plastic cover should be able to come out. So right there, I'm gonna get it out of the way. Got this plastic cover removed. Wow, so we had to do all of this just to remove the radiator. Huh, you gotta love Mercedes. So I'm gonna show you the other bolts that we have to remove over here so we can separate the AC condenser from the radiator. So I'll bring you guys over here so I can show you these bolts that I'm gonna remove. So now we're gonna remove these bolts. So these little torque bolts over here hold this transmission fluid cooler. So we're gonna remove this one also. And then there's another one over here. Alright, so we got this transmission cooler loose. So now let's go on the other side of the radiator so we can disconnect the transmission lines. Alright, so we're gonna disconnect this line over here. There is a little clip here that we have to undo. also we have to be careful not to lose it. So this one, so let's put it over here. After removing that clip, so this line should now come out. Alright, so the line is disconnected. So now we can lift this transmission fluid cooler. Actually, we don't have to lift it, we can just leave it hanging. So right there, this is disconnected. There's another line down over here. Let me bring the light here so you can see. So we're gonna disconnect this line. It's basically the same process as the one we disconnected up here. So I'm gonna remove the clip. So here comes the clip. So now we're gonna remove the line. So right there, the line is disconnected. We're gonna let the fluid drain out, and then we're gonna undo the lower radiator hose. While the fluid is draining out, we're gonna come on this side here. We're gonna come over here and disconnect the upper radiator hose. Okay, so now let's disconnect the upper radiator hose. Alright, so the upper radiator hose is disconnected. So we're gonna try to pry it up here. Alright, so the upper radiator hose is removed. So now we're gonna disconnect these two lines over here. There's this one, and then there's another one down here. These lines are the power steering cooler lines. So we're gonna remove these two lines, and then I'm going to disconnect the lower radiator hose. After I do that, then we will unclip the AC condenser, and then our radiator should be able to come out. So now I'm gonna disconnect these lines over here and the lower radiator hose, and then I'll bring you guys back up. Alright guys, so I disconnected these two power steering cooler lines. So these two lines are disconnected, and I also disconnected the lower radiator hose. So all the hoses on this side are disconnected, so we're good to go. So now we're gonna remove the AC condenser from the radiator. The AC condenser has some plastic tabs over here that we have to push down. So basically, actually I'm gonna show you on this side, it's gonna be easier here. So this over here, there's a tab you have to push down. So you push these two tabs down and then you pull out. Okay, so push the plastic tabs inward, and then you pry the condenser out. As you can see, this side is free. So I'm gonna do the same thing on this side, and then the AC condenser is gonna lay forward a little bit, and then the radiator should be able to come out. So now let's do that so we can remove the radiator. Alright, so the AC condenser is disconnected from the radiator. So now I should be able to lift the radiator up. So I'm gonna lift up the radiator. Alright, so here comes the radiator. Alright, so the radiator is removed, guys. So here's the radiator. So I'm gonna drain it. Let's drain it a little bit more. Alright, so here's the old radiator. I'm gonna get it out of the way. So here it is. So here is the old radiator. And the leak was somewhere over here. So the radiator was leaking somewhere over here. So there's a crack here. This is where the radiator was leaking from. So I'm gonna get this radiator out of the way. I'll bring you guys back up once I get the new radiator prepped up so we can install it. So now I'm gonna get this out of the way. Alright, so the radiator is removed. Check this out. There's a big hole here now. You see how dirty this is? So we're gonna clean this up really well. I'm gonna prep up the new radiator. Once I get the new radiator prepped up, I'll bring you guys back up so we can install the new radiator. So I will prepare the new radiator and then I'll bring you guys back up. Alright guys, so here's the new radiator. I'm gonna get it out of the box. So this is the radiator that we're gonna install. So radiator. So it looks like the right one. So I'm gonna get this radiator prepared and then I'll bring you guys back up so we can install it. Now I'm gonna install our radiator. So I'm gonna put this transmission cooler out of the way. I'm also gonna move this AC condenser down a little bit. So now I can bring our radiator. So the radiator is gonna go in this way. Alright, so right there, the AC condenser is snapped in place. So now I'm gonna put this plastic bracket over here. So basically at this point, putting everything back together is the reverse process of the removal process. So I'm making sure that everything we removed goes back where it came from. Okay. Alright, so the radiator is installed. We snapped the AC condenser on the radiator. The transmission cooler is also installed. So now I'm gonna bring you guys over here so we can start putting the bolts back on. Alright, so I've tightened the bolts for the transmission cooler. So now I'm gonna bring you guys over here so we can reconnect the transmission cooler lines and the power steering cooler lines. Alright guys, so the radiator is on. Now the next step is going to be reconnecting these lines over here. So these are the power steering lines. We're gonna reconnect these two. This one is gonna go over here and this one will go over here. And then I'm gonna install the upper radiator hose, and then we're gonna do the same thing on this side. We're gonna reconnect these transmission lines, and then I will reconnect the lower radiator hose. So I'll get those reconnected and then I'll bring you guys back up. Alright guys, so I reconnected the upper radiator hose and I also reconnected both power steering lines, and I also reconnected the lower radiator hose. So the lower radiator hose over here is reconnected. The bottom transmission cooler line is also reconnected. So now we're gonna reconnect this one. So basically the way you connect this one, this new radiator came with new clips. Remember the clips we removed earlier? So this one came with new ones. So we're not gonna remove these ones. So what are we gonna do? We're gonna line up the line over here and then make sure it's sitting straight, and then we're gonna push it in. So just like that. Okay, so the line is installed. So you're gonna try to like push it out to see if it's sitting well. So that's good. So now we're gonna put the cap on. So right there. So this is good to go. Okay, so we're making progress. So after reconnecting the radiator hoses and the power steering lines and the transmission cooler lines. So now the next step is going to be installing the plastic cover that covers the radiator and the AC condenser, and then we will install the bumper support. So now let's do that. Alright, so now we're going to install this plastic cover. Alright, so we're gonna put all the four 10mm bolts that hold this plastic cover in place. Alright, so this plastic cover is installed. So now we're gonna install the bumper support. Alright, so right there. So now we're gonna put the bolts on. Alright, so I tightened all the bolts for the bumper support. So now the next step is gonna be installing the air cooler. Before we install the air cooler, I'm gonna clean up the fins of this AC condenser. So I'll clean this up and then I'll bring you guys back up so we can install the inner cooler. Alright, so now we're gonna install the charge air cooler. So the air cooler is gonna go right over here. Alright, so I got the bolts for the air cooler tightened. So now we're gonna install the center bracket. Alright, so here comes the center bracket, and it's gonna go this way. Alright, so I got the center bracket installed. So now we're gonna install the radiator fan. So the fan is gonna come this way. Alright, so I got the 2 bolts for the radiator fan installed. So I'll bring you guys over here so I can show you what I just did. And then we will put the top part of the core support. Alright, so the fan is installed. So everything is coming back together slowly and surely. Okay, so now the next step is going to be installing the core support. So now let's do that. Alright, so we're making progress. So now the next step is going to be reinstalling the front bumper. Lift it up. Alright guys, so the front bumper is installed. Everything is back together. I will bring you guys over here under the hood so I can show you how everything is back together. And then we're gonna start the vehicle so we can verify our repair. The radiator is replaced. I'm gonna start it and let the vehicle idle for a couple minutes to see if there will be any coolant leaks. If everything checks out okay, we will wrap up this video and take this vehicle out of here. So I'm gonna bring you under the hood so we can check everything before we start the engine. Alright, so we are under the hood. Everything is back together. Okay. So I did reconnect the fan control module. So the radiator is replaced. So now I'm gonna go inside the vehicle and start the engine. Alright guys, so the engine started. As you can hear, the engine is running. So we're gonna look around the engine bay to see if there's a coolant leak. So we're looking around the radiator area. So there's no leaks. So that's good. We're gonna look around here. So everything looks dry. So that's good. So now let's look underneath. So we're looking underneath over here. There is no coolant leaks. So that's good. Alright guys, so this is fixed. The coolant leak is fixed. I'm gonna go inside the vehicle and turn off the engine so we can wrap up this video. Alright Okay guys, so the engine is off. This vehicle is fixed. This vehicle came to us because it was leaking coolant. We pressurized the cooling system, and then we had determined that the old radiator was leaking. The old radiator had a crack on the radiator core. So we replaced the old radiator with a new one. We started the engine. We looked around the engine bay to see if there were any coolant leaks. We looked around and there were no coolant leaks. So this is fixed, and this is how you remove and replace a radiator on this 2008 Mercedes GL320 with a 3.0 liter. I hope you like this video. If you do like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't, give it a thumb down. But if you do, you gotta tell me why so we can make better videos in the future. If this is your first time here, subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell so you can get notified every time I upload a new video. If you have any comments, questions, criticism, leave them in the comment box. Thanks for watching guys. See you next time.